I heard it through this wooden fence. Honestly, why is she even still around? Like, what's the point? The laugh that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of laugh shared between people who already agree. Casual, unbothered. The way you laugh at something that doesn't matter. I was standing on the other side of that gate holding a glass dish of apple crumble, still warm from my oven. The cinnamon smell rose up around me in the August heat. My hands were steady. I want you to know that. My hands did not shake. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. Then I pushed open the gate and walked into my son's backyard like I hadn't heard a single word. The party was already in full swing. String lights zigzagged between the oak trees. The picnic tables were covered in those disposable checkered cloths Brittany bought in bulk from the party supply store. Someone's Bluetooth speaker was playing something fast and forgettable, turned up just loud enough to discourage real conversation. There were maybe 20 people scattered across the lawn. Some were Ethan's work colleagues. Some were Brittany's friends from her yoga studio. A few were people I recognized from holidays past. Faces I'd fed. Faces I'd made room for at my own table when they had nowhere to go. None of them smiled when I walked in. Brittany appeared from somewhere near the grill, moving toward me with that particular smile she reserved for moments when she needed to seem warm. It was a performance I'd watched for 11 years. I knew every beat of it. "Oh, Dorothy." She touched her collarbone like she was surprised. "We didn't know you were coming." I lifted the dish slightly. "I brought apple crumble." She looked at the dish the way you look at something left on your doorstep that you're not sure how to dispose of. "Oh, how sweet." She didn't take it from my hands. She was already half turning away. "There's room at the end table, I think." There was room. At the far end of the last picnic table, next to the citronella bucket and a stack of unused napkins. I set my dish down there and found myself a folding chair. It creaked when I sat. My back ached from the drive over, but I sat up straight. I have always sat up straight. Ethan was at the grill. He had his back to me for most of the next hour. He wore the apron I'd given him 2 Christmases ago, the one with the corny saying about grill masters that he'd seemed genuinely pleased about when he opened it. He laughed and gestured and flipped burgers and existed in that easy, unself-conscious way that people do when they are entirely comfortable in their surroundings. He did not come over to say hello. Cooper, my 12-year-old grandson, ran past the end table 3 times chasing a dog I didn't recognize. The 3rd time I said his name. "Cooper." He glanced back mid-stride, registered my face, and kept running. Not rudely, just as though I were a piece of lawn furniture he'd noted and moved past. Savannah, 16 now and taller than I'd last seen her, sat with a cluster of girls her own age near the hydrangea bushes. She had her mother's posture and her father's eyes. My eyes, actually, if you went back far enough. She did not look in my direction once during the entire party. Not once. At some point, Ethan raised a beer above his head and called out, "To family!" And the yard erupted in the cheerful clink of glasses and bottles knocking together. No one looked at me. I raised my glass of lemonade and drank anyway. The apple crumble sat untouched at the end of the table for 2 hours. People reached past it for the potato salad. They scooped around it for the baked beans. One of Brittany's yoga friends picked up the dish, looked at it without expression, and set it back down slightly to the left of where it had been, as if she were rearranging a centerpiece that wasn't quite working. Brittany came by once more, around 6 o'clock. She crouched slightly the way people do when they're trying to appear warm without actually sitting down. "Did you want me to fix you a plate?" I looked at her. "I'm fine, thank you." She nodded too quickly and was already moving before I'd finished the sentence. I stayed until the end. I want to be clear about that. I did not leave early out of hurt feelings, and I did not make a scene. I stayed until the music clicked off and the guests began drifting inside. I helped stack paper plates. I folded napkins into a neat pile. I wiped down the sticky stretch of table nearest me with a damp paper towel I found in my purse. Then I picked up my glass dish, still full, not one spoonful taken, and I walked back through that wooden gate. Not in anger, not in tears, but with something new settling into the center of my chest. Something quiet and certain, the way concrete feels when it's just begun to cure. The next morning was a Sunday. I made coffee in my smallest pot, just 1 cup, and sat at the kitchen table by the front window, the same table where Ethan used to sit and do his homework, his legs too long for the chair by the time he was 13, his sneakers always untied. Back then, he needed me to quiz him on state capitals. Back then, he would reach across this same table and steal bites of whatever I was baking, and I would swat his hand and he would grin, and we were something simple and good. That was a long time ago. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't open the newspaper. I just sat with my coffee and let the morning be what it was. Quiet, gray at the edges, honest. Ethan's text came in at 9:14. Hey, Britt says she might have come across kind of wrong yesterday. She was just tired. You know how these things get. Hope you had a good time. I read it twice. I deleted it. Not replied. Deleted. I had been storing his explanations for years, keeping them in careful mental folders the way you keep receipts for things you can't return, just in case you need proof later that the transaction happened. He didn't mean it. She's just stressed. It was a long week. You know how she is. I was done filing. The apple crumble dish was clean and dry and back in its place on the second shelf of my cabinet. I'd washed it the night before, the way you wash something that has come back to you having given nothing. I left the house once that morning just to bring in the mail. I didn't open any of the envelopes. One of them had Ethan's name on it, still listed at this address for some old account, some vestige of a time when this house was the center of something. This had been my house for 31 years. I'd bought it the year Ethan started middle school. I'd painted every room myself, tiled the kitchen floor the summer after Walter died, replaced the gutters when the neighbors assumed I'd wait for a man to help me. I stopped waiting for a lot of things a long time ago. But there was something else about this house I hadn't thought about in years. Something sitting in a manila folder in my filing cabinet, behind the insurance papers and ahead of the tax records. I went to get it after my second cup of coffee. The folder was labeled Ethan, House. Inside, a purchase agreement, a deed, and a letter in my own handwriting, signed and notarized, gifting $47,000 from my retirement account to Ethan and Brittany Hargrove for the down payment on their home. No expectation of repayment, the letter read. No strings attached. Because you are my son, and I believe in your future. I sat at the kitchen table and read that last line 3 times. It hurt more than I expected, not because I regretted the money. I had never regretted the money. It hurt because of how much I had meant those words when I wrote them. Because you are my son. Because I had believed, truly believed, that love given freely would come back around in its own way. I put the folder on the table. I did not put it away. At 2:30, Patty Nolan from next door knocked on my door with a container of lentil soup and a question about her missing tabby cat. I hadn't seen the cat, but I invited her in. We sat at the kitchen table and I reheated the soup and we split the last of a lemon pound cake I'd made on Thursday. Patty didn't ask me anything pointed. She didn't notice the folder on the table, or if she did, she left it alone. She just talked about her cat. His name was apparently Gerald, and about the new family that moved in 2 streets over, and about how the pharmacy had gotten her prescription wrong for the 3rd time this year. At some point, she said the pound cake was the best thing she'd eaten all week, and I laughed, and it was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere uncomplicated. I needed that laugh more than I could have said. After she left, I went back to the table. I sat down across from the folder. I thought about what $47,000 looked like in a retirement account. I thought about what it looked like in someone else's deed. Then I picked up my phone and found a number I hadn't called in almost 2 years. Helen Watkins. We'd met in a bridge group 8 or 9 years back. She wasn't exactly a friend. We didn't have lunch or exchange birthday cards. But she was sharp in a way I'd always respected. She'd spent 30 years in probate law before she retired. She understood how money moved through families, and more importantly, she understood what happened when it didn't move back. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Dorothy Hargrove, she said. It's been a while. It has, I agreed. Helen, I have some questions about property, gifts, estate documents. A brief pause. Come by tomorrow, she said. Bring everything. I slept well that night. No pills, no lying awake doing arithmetic in the dark. Just sleep, deep and uninterrupted, like a house settling after a long day. In the morning I dressed carefully. Pressed slacks, a silk blouse, and a deep burgundy that Walter had always liked. The good pearl earrings. My wool coat, even though the forecast said 62 degrees. When you are about to change the shape of your life, you put on something with buttons. Helen's house smelled like lemon wood polish and peppermint tea. She met me at the door, practical and unsentimental as always, and led me to her kitchen table without ceremony. I spread out the contents of the folder in front of her. The purchase agreement, the deed, the letter, The handwritten accounting I'd done that morning of every financial contribution I'd made to Ethan's household over the years. The down payment. The emergency loan 4 years ago when Ethan's car needed a new transmission. The $1,200 I'd quietly given Brittany when she said they were short on the kids' school supplies last fall. Helen put on her reading glasses and went through each document without comment. It took about 15 minutes. Then she took off her glasses and set them on the table and looked at me. No written expectations, she said. No shared title, no formal loan agreement. As far as the law is concerned, it's their money. You gifted it. I know, I said. That doesn't mean you're powerless. She told me what could still be done. The power of attorney currently naming Ethan as my legal agent, that could be revoked today with a notarized filing. The will that named him as primary beneficiary and executor, that could be rewritten. The bank accounts where he held authorized user status, those could be restructured. A living trust could be established that removed any possibility of the house passing to him or to Brittany. You can't take back the $47,000, she said, but you can make absolutely certain they don't receive another cent, now or later. I nodded. She slid a legal pad across the table and began writing a checklist in her careful, even handwriting. When she finished, she pushed it toward me. Take the night, she said. Think it over. I folded the list in half and placed it in my purse. I don't need the night, I said, but I appreciate you. That evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table. No music, no television. Just the particular silence of a house that holds 31 years of living in its walls. The silence I had spent decades trying to fill, with cooking, with visiting, with phone calls that went longer than they needed to, with dishes carried through wooden gates to parties where I had not been expected. I took a blank sheet of paper from the notepad on the counter. I wrote a name at the top, Ethan. I looked at it for a long time. Then I drew a single line through it, not in hatred, not even in anger exactly, in the way you cross something off a list when it is finished, when you have done what you could do with it, and it is time to move forward to the next thing. Outside, the August evening was cooling. The light through my kitchen window had gone that particular amber color it gets in the last half hour before dusk, the color that used to make me feel pleasantly melancholy, like something beautiful was ending. Tonight it just looked like light. I folded the piece of paper, placed it in the folder, and put the folder back in the filing cabinet. Tomorrow, I would go to Helen. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. But tonight, I let myself sit in the kitchen where I had raised my son, in the house I had built into something worth living in. And I said a quiet goodbye to the version of my family that had only ever existed in my own imagination, the version where the cobbler was always eaten, where someone reached for the dish, where a boy who once needed me for state capitals had grown into a man who saw me when I walked into a room. I said goodbye to that family, and then I made myself one more cup of coffee, sat back down, and began to plan the rest of my life. Helen's office was her sunroom, technically, a narrow room along the back of her house with windows on 3 sides and a folding table she'd converted into a proper desk by sheer force of organization, files stacked in labeled columns, a coffee mug that said retired but still right, a glass jar of peppermints that appeared to be purely decorative because in all the years I'd known Helen Watkins, I had never once seen her eat one. She was already at the table when I arrived, reading glasses on, a fresh legal pad open in front of her. I sat down across from her and placed the folder on the table between us. Power of attorney first, I said. Helen looked at me over the rim of her glasses, not surprised exactly. More like a person confirming something they'd already suspected. You want to revoke it. Today. Dorothy. She set down her pen. That's Ethan's authorization to make medical and financial decisions on your behalf if you're incapacitated. Removing him leaves you without an agent. That's not a small thing. I understand what it means. Do you have someone else in mind? Not yet, but I would rather have no one than the wrong one. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't ask any more questions, and slid the document toward her side of the table. We'll file the revocation today. I'll notarize it here. You'll need to sign 3 pages, but I'll walk you through each one. I sat back in my chair. My heart was steady. My hands were still. This was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think people assume that when a woman of a certain age begins making changes to her estate documents, she must be acting from spite or wounded pride. She must be punishing someone. This was not punishment. This was repair. We worked through the list Helen had written the day before, item by item, the way you work through a grocery list, methodical, purposeful, without drama. The will came next. "Remove Ethan as executor," I said. "Remove him completely." Helen's pen paused above the legal pad. "You want to cut him out entirely? No portion? No conditional bequest?" "He has a house," I said. "He has a job. He has a family and a future, and $47,000 of my retirement money underneath his foundation. He doesn't need what I've saved. He's already made clear what he values." She wrote it down without arguing. That was one of the things I had always appreciated about Helen. She had spent 30 years watching families tear themselves apart over estate documents. She had seen enough to know that a woman who arrived prepared, dressed well, and spoke in complete sentences had usually already done her thinking. Who takes his place as executor? I don't know yet. A professional, perhaps. Someone appointed by the court. Someone who doesn't look through me like I'm a loose end they forgot to tie. She made a note. And the house? Your house? It goes into a trust. My name, my terms. When I'm gone, it gets sold. Every cent of the proceeds goes to a women's shelter. I reached into my purse and placed a small brochure on the table. The Greenway Women's Shelter on Millbrook Avenue. A place I knew something about, though I hadn't told Helen that part. Not yet. She looked at the brochure, then she looked at me. "You're very clear about this," she said. "I have been unclear for a very long time," I said. "It turns out clarity isn't as hard as I made it look." We worked for nearly 2 hours. Helen printed forms, explained clauses, walked me through contingencies with the patience of someone who understood that precision mattered here, that a single poorly worded sentence in a legal document could unravel everything you'd carefully built. When we were finished, she arranged the documents in a neat stack, notarized each one, and made me 2 copies of everything, which she slipped into a manila envelope with my name written on the tab in her clean, deliberate handwriting. As I stood to leave, she walked me to her front door. "If you change your mind on any of it," she said, "just call." "I won't," I said. She believed me. I could tell. Outside, the morning air was sharper than it had been when I arrived, or maybe I was simply more awake to it. The sky was a high, clean blue. I walked slowly back to my car, the envelope tucked under my arm like something valuable, which it was. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time and almost didn't recognize. Weight leaving. Not all of it, but enough to notice the difference. When I got home, the answering machine was blinking. I pressed play. "Hey, Mom. Got your voicemail about some legal questions or whatever. Not sure what's going on. Britt mentioned you seemed a little off at the party. Anyway, give me a call when you get a chance. Okay, bye." I stood in the hallway and listened to the whole message with my coat still on. Then I deleted it. Then I did something I had never done in my 72 years on this earth. I blocked my son's phone number. I stood there for a moment after I'd done it, waiting to feel something catastrophic. Some seismic shift, some alarm. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hallway, and the ticking of the clock above the console table, and the particular relief of a woman who has finally stopped waiting for a call that was never going to be the one she needed. The locksmith came the next morning. He was young. 25 at most, with careful eyes and the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned early that people hiring locksmiths were usually in the middle of something important and didn't need small talk. He replaced the front door lock and the back door lock without a single unnecessary word. When he handed me the new keys, I tipped him generously and thanked him by name, because his name was on his shirt, and I believe in using people's names. I made 4 copies of each key that afternoon, 1 in my purse, 1 in the fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet, 1 with Patty Nolan next door, 1 in my safety deposit box at First National. Ethan did not get a copy. Ethan no longer had a copy. That night I slept without waking once. The following Saturday, I drove to First National Credit Union on Carpenter Avenue. The branch was quieter than I remembered. A soft, carpeted hush broken only by the low percussion of keyboards and the occasional murmur of a transaction being completed at the teller windows. I asked the receptionist for a manager and was led a few minutes later into a glass-walled office near the back. The manager's name was Cheryl Odom. She was perhaps 40, brisk and competent, with the kind of settled professionalism that puts you at ease immediately. "What can I help you with today, Mrs. Hargrove?" "I'd like to review all authorized users on my accounts," I said. "Every account. checking, savings, the money market. She pulled up the screen and reviewed it in silence for a moment. You have one co-signer on the joint savings account and one authorized cardholder on your Visa, she said. Both listed as Ethan T. Hargrove. She glanced up. Your son? Used to be, I says, they said. A brief pause. Professional. Appropriate. Would you like to remove him? I'd like to remove him completely, I said. Cancel his card. Reissue everything in my name only. I'd also like to change all the security questions, reset the online login credentials, and put a personal verification requirement on the account so that no changes can be made without me appearing in person. Cheryl's fingers moved to her keyboard. Completely understood. We can do all of that today. While she worked, I looked at the plant on the corner of her desk. A pothos, its leaves heart-shaped and glossy, trailing in long green ropes toward the floor. I had kept a pothos in Ethan's nursery when he was an infant. The same trailing leaves, the same resilient indifference to neglect. He had once tried to eat a fistful of the soil it was planted in. I'd laughed so hard I nearly dropped the diaper bag. He had been so easy to love then. That's the thing no one tells you about raising children. You don't love them less as they grow. You love them just as much, or more. But somewhere along the way, the love stops being something they can feel, and it becomes something only you carry. And you keep carrying it long after your arms have given out, because you don't know how to put down something you've been holding that long. Cheryl slid the paperwork across the desk. I signed where indicated. If you'd like to set up a trust account or additional beneficiary designations, she said, our estate planning team can— Not today, I said. Today is enough. I'm still building the next version of my life. I'll be back when I know what it needs. She smiled, small and genuine. The smile of someone who understood more than she was required to say. When I stepped out of the bank into the afternoon sunlight, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. At home, I went to the hallway closet. On the top shelf, behind the Christmas tablecloths and the quilt I'd started and never finished, was my fireproof lockbox. I opened it on the kitchen table. Inside, the deed to the house, our marriage certificate, Walter's death certificate, both children's birth certificates. I mean Ethan's. We only had the one. I removed Ethan's birth certificate from the box. I didn't destroy it. That is not who I am. But I moved it into a folder I labeled History, and placed that folder in the back of the filing cabinet behind everything else. It belonged there now, not among my active documents, not among the things that governed my present life. It was history, and history, I was learning, does not need to be destroyed to be set aside. That evening I opened my address book, the one with the plastic divider tabs from the early 90s, yellowed now at the edges and slightly sticky from years of handling. I turned to the H section. Ethan and Brittany Hargrove. Savannah. Cooper. I uncapped a pen and drew a slow, deliberate line through each name. Then I turned to the W section and wrote in careful letters, Helen Watkins, Attorney, Trust, and Estate Planning. I closed the address book and put it back in the drawer. That night the rain came in soft and slow against the windows, and I left them open just enough to hear it. It made a quiet percussion on the sill, steady and unhurried, like something that had been waiting a long time to fall and was finally getting the chance. 3 days later, I sat across from Robert Aldridge. Helen had recommended him. A real estate attorney, she said, with a specialty in living trusts and property transfers. His office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, and his voice, when he greeted me at the door, was exactly the kind of voice you trust before you've had time to think about why. Low and measured, with no wasted words. I spread everything on his desk. The deed. 30 years of property tax records. Every repair invoice I'd saved. New roof in 2009. Complete plumbing overhaul in 2014. The furnace replacement 3 winters ago that Ethan had told me wasn't worth the investment. He had said that with confidence, my son. It's an old house, Mom. You'll spend more than it's worth keeping it running. And I had nodded and smiled and then gone ahead and called the HVAC company the following Monday, because I understood something Ethan didn't. A house is not an investment. A house is a life. And you maintain a life because it is yours, not because someone has calculated its rate of return. Robert reviewed the documents the way Helen had, quietly, thoroughly, without performing urgency. A revocable living trust is straightforward, he said. You remain the trustee and sole beneficiary while you're living. You retain complete control. The property doesn't pass through probate when you die. It goes directly to whoever or whatever you designate. I want it sold, I said. Everything liquidated. The proceeds go to the Greenway Women's Shelter on Millbrook Avenue, in full. He raised an eyebrow, not judgmentally, just noting. No family inheritance at all? No. He wrote it down. I also want Ethan removed from every document where he appears as a beneficiary. Life insurance, healthcare proxy, everything. I'll prepare a comprehensive list, he said. We can notarize in-house. You'll also want to update the will to reflect these changes. Helen mentioned you'd already started that process. I have. A small smile crossed his face. Then we're just making it official. We worked for nearly 2 hours. He explained every clause, flagged every contingency, made sure I understood what I was signing before I signed it. When we were finished, he handed me a slim navy binder. Your trust packet, he said. Keep it somewhere safe. Everything else we file this week. I stood and thanked him and walked out into the afternoon with that binder under my arm and a feeling I hadn't experienced in longer than I could name. The feeling of my own spine having real weight. Of standing upright not because I was bracing for something, but simply because I was. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery on the corner of Main and Delwood that I hadn't been inside in at least 4 years. A young woman behind the counter called me ma'am and slid me a free snickerdoodle for being lovely. I bought a lemon tart and ate it in the car with the windows down, the afternoon sun warm across my knees. I did not think about Ethan. I thought about the lemon tart and the afternoon light and the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be, in a life that was beginning, at long last, to fit me properly. He came that evening. I heard his car before I saw it. The engine idling at the curb for a long stretch, the way it does when someone is sitting behind the wheel trying to decide whether to go through with something. Then footsteps on the porch. A knock. I didn't move from the couch. Another knock. Then his voice, lower than I expected, less certain. Mom, please. I know you changed the locks. I know you blocked my number. I need to understand what's happening. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and listened. I'm not angry, he said through the door. I just want to talk. The thing about Ethan's voice is that I have known it since before it was a voice, since it was a heartbeat, since it was a cry in a delivery room, since it was a small boy calling Mama from the bottom of the stairs. I know every register of it. I know when he is angry and when he is frightened and when he is performing and when he is telling the truth. He sounded through that door like someone who had just realized he was no longer holding the pen. Just tell me what's going on, he said. Please. I sat. After a while, the footsteps retreated. I heard the car door, the engine, the sound of him leaving. I waited 10 minutes before I stood. Then I went to the window and looked out at the empty curb and the ordinary quiet of the street and the early stars just beginning to show in the sky above the Henderson's oak tree. Then I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. He came back 4 days later. I opened the door this time. I want to be honest about why. Not because I had softened, but because some things need to be said face to face. Some conclusions need a witness. He looked older than the last time I'd really looked at him. Or maybe I had simply stopped looking at him clearly, the way you stop seeing a piece of furniture you've lived around for years. You blocked me, he said, not accusing, confused. Yes. You changed everything. Yes. Why? I looked at him. This man who had been my boy, who had stolen bites of batter and scraped his knees on my driveway and called me from college when he was homesick, even though he'd never admit it. I looked at him and I said, I heard what Brittany said, Ethan, in the backyard, through the fence. Something moved across his face, too quick to name. She didn't mean it. She talks without thinking sometimes. You know how she... You laughed, I said. He stopped. I heard you laugh, I said. And then I walked through that gate and spent 4 hours at a party where no one offered to take the dish out of my hands. And when I left, not one person had eaten a single bite of what I brought. I paused. That was not a bad afternoon, Ethan. That was the last afternoon in a very long line of them. So you're erasing me, he said. Over one afternoon. I am not erasing you, I said. I am choosing myself. For the first time in a very long time, I am choosing myself. You're letting Savannah visit. Savannah asked to come back. You waited until your name started disappearing from documents. His jaw tightened. This is about the money. This is about dignity, I said. The money was just the proof I needed that I had spent years confusing generosity with the hope of being loved. He looked past me into the hallway, looking for something. The side table with his school photos, maybe. The basket of Christmas cards I used to keep by the door. All of it gone now, or packed, or put away where it belonged. I'll always be your son, he said. Yes, I said. And I will always be the woman who gave you more than she had to give. But I am done giving myself away to people who can't see me when I'm standing right in front of them. I stepped back. I closed the door. Not slammed, not dramatic. Just shut with both hands, firmly and finally, the way you close a chapter you have read too many times. That night I cried for 7 minutes. I timed it on the kitchen clock. I gave myself those 7 minutes completely, the full weight of them, the grief of a mother closing a door on her child, the loneliness of having been right when you desperately wished you were wrong. I cried for the boy who lined up his toy dinosaurs on my windowsill and named them after his teachers. I cried for the man he might have been. I cried for the $47,000 and the apple crumble, and every Sunday I'd driven to that house with something warm in my hands and driven home with it untouched. 7 minutes. Then I dried my face, made tea, folded one more cardboard box into shape, and placed it beside the front door with a strip of packing tape along the seam. On the side of the box in black marker, I wrote one word, keep. I stood back and looked at it. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The call came on a Thursday evening, just after 8 o'clock. I didn't recognize the number. These days I had become careful about numbers I didn't recognize, so I let it ring twice before answering. When I did, there was a pause on the other end, the particular pause of someone who has rehearsed something and is now deciding whether to say it. Then, "Grandma, is this still your number?" Savannah. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Not younger, smaller. The way voices get when people are trying to take up less space than usual. "It is," I said. Another pause. "I found it in one of Dad's old phones. He didn't know I was looking." I didn't say anything. I let the silence sit between us without rushing to fill it, which is something I had to learn to do in my 60s and am still practicing now. "I wanted to call sooner," she said. "I just didn't know if you'd pick up." I picked up. "Yeah," a breath. "Grandma, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the backyard, for the library, for pretending I didn't see you." A pause, and then quietly, "For laughing when Mom said what she said." I sat down in the armchair by the window. Outside, the streetlights had just come on, casting long orange pools on the wet pavement. It had rained that afternoon, briefly and hard, and the street had that clean mineral smell that comes after summer rain. I did not rush to comfort her. That instinct, the one that lives in the chest of every mother and grandmother, the one that lunges forward the moment someone we love shows distress, I had been learning to recognize it before I acted on it. Comfort given too quickly can let people off too easily. It can rob them of the full weight of what they're carrying, and the full weight is sometimes exactly what's needed. "What are you sorry for?" I asked, gently, but clearly. She took a breath. "For acting like you didn't matter, because you did. You do." She stopped, started again. It was easier to go along with how they acted, and I hate that I did that." "You wanted to belong," I said. "Yes." Her voice cracked slightly on the word. "Yes, that's exactly it." "I understand that," I said. "I spent most of my life wanting the same thing." A long pause. "Can I see you?" she asked. Just me, not them. I thought about the drawer full of stickers and little notebooks I had emptied into a paper bag and left at the curb. I thought about the Christmas gift, the hand-stitched picture book, that she had never mentioned receiving. I thought about the zoo, when she was 5, and how she had held my hand crossing the parking lot and refused to let go even after we were safely on the sidewalk, just because she didn't want to. I thought about who she had been before she learned who she was supposed to be. "All right," I said. "Come by tomorrow after school. Just you." She exhaled, a long, shaky release, like someone who had been holding their breath for the entire length of a summer. "I will. I promise." After I hung up, I sat for a while with the phone in my lap. My tea had gone cold. I didn't mind. Some moments ask you to sit still in them, and this was one. Monday came gray and soft, the sky the color of old linen. I baked banana bread in the morning, not for Savannah specifically, not as a performance of welcome, but because the apartment needed warmth and I needed the ritual of it. The measuring and the folding and the particular satisfaction of sliding a full loaf pan into the oven. Walter used to say I baked the way other people prayed. I think he was right. At 4:17 there was a knock at the door. Savannah stood on this porch in a hoodie at least 2 sizes too large, the sleeves pulled down over her hands, her sneakers with the laces half undone. Her eyes were rimmed with something that wasn't entirely mascara. She looked in that moment very young and very tired and very much like someone who had made a decision she wasn't certain she'd be rewarded for. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd knock," I replied. I stepped aside. She came in. We sat at the kitchen table, the small one I'd brought from the house, the one that fit exactly 2 people comfortably and a third if everyone kept their elbows in. I poured tea. She pulled a piece of banana bread apart with both hands the way she'd done since she was small, eating it in uneven pieces rather than slices, and I didn't say a word about it because some habits are so familiar they feel like home. "Mom says you've gone crazy," she said, not cruelly, almost apologetically, like she was reporting something she hadn't endorsed. "Does she?" "She says you're cutting everyone out, that you're being vindictive." She looked down at the bread. "I don't think that's what's happening." "What do you think is happening?" She considered. "I think you got tired." "That's part of it," I said. But tired isn't quite the right word. I didn't run out of energy. I ran out of willingness to pretend that things were fine when they weren't. That's different. She nodded slowly. "Dad's been weird at home. Quiet. Mom keeps saying you're having some kind of episode, but he doesn't agree with her. He just goes quiet." "Your father is a man learning that his silence has a price tag," I said. "That's uncomfortable work." Savannah looked at me, really looked at me, in the way that teenagers rarely look at older people, as though she were actually trying to see me, not just waiting for her turn to speak. "I missed you," she said. "Not the gifts or the food, just you, the way you talk, the way you don't apologize for every sentence." She picked at the edge of her bread. "Mom apologizes constantly and means none of it. You never apologize unless you mean it." "That's the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in months," I said, Sissy said. She almost smiled. "I don't hate your parents," I told her. "I want you to understand that. I don't even hate what they did exactly. I hate that I allowed it for so long. That's mine to carry, not theirs." "Can I come back?" she asked, quietly. "Not to fix things, not to be a messenger, just to come back." I looked at this girl who had her great-grandmother's stubborn jaw and her grandfather Walter's eyes and some essential quality that was entirely her own, something direct and unfinished and worth cultivating. "You can come back," I said, "but not for pie, not for gifts, only for truth, only as yourself. I don't have room anymore for the version of you that looks through me in libraries." "I know. Do you?" "Yes." She met my eyes. "I do." She stayed an hour. We talked about her English class and the novel they were reading that she actually liked. We talked about a stray cat that had taken up residence under the bleachers at her school. We talked about her idea for a student support group, for kids who didn't feel like home was home, and how her guidance counselor had been cautiously encouraging. She did not ask me about Ethan. I did not offer anything about him. Some conversations are complete without every member of the family present. When she stood to leave, she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made something," she said. "Last night. It's not very good, but let me see." She handed it over with the particular reluctance of someone offering something real. I unfolded it. A pencil drawing, rough in places, precise in others. A woman seated in a chair, her back straight, her chin lifted slightly, her eyes facing forward without apology. In front of her, a chessboard. On her side of the board, only 2 pieces remained. On the other side, a full set. But her 2 pieces, a queen and a rook, were positioned with absolute intention. Not losing, calculating. Beneath the drawing, in Savannah's handwriting, "She's not done. She's just starting to play her game." I held the paper in both hands and did not speak for a moment. Then I looked up at her. "Can I keep this?" She blinked. "Really? It's just a sketch. Can I hang it in the new apartment? The expression that crossed her face was something I want to remember until I can't remember anything anymore. Surprise giving way to pleasure, giving way to something that looked very much like relief. Like being told that the thing you made with your own hands was worth something. Yeah, she said. Yeah, you can. She hugged me at the door, tightly, briefly, the way teenagers hug when they're feeling something they don't have language for yet. Then she went down the porch steps and along the walk, and I stood in the doorway and watched until she turned the corner at the end of the street. I didn't feel hopeful. Not exactly. I felt honest, which is rarer and lasts longer. That night I wrote in my journal, maybe some doors don't need to be slammed, just gently locked from the inside, with a window left cracked for the ones who come alone and knock with care. The apartment viewing was on a Thursday afternoon. I wore my navy cardigan with the mother-of-pearl buttons that still caught the light properly. Sandra Kowalski, the property manager, met me at the entrance of the complex. Brick buildings, window boxes with late-season petunias, a wooden bench under a linden tree whose leaves were just beginning to turn. Ground floor unit, Sandra said, unlocking the door to 1B. South-facing windows, heat and water included. Neighbors are quiet, mostly retirees and a couple of school teachers. The apartment was smaller than my house, obviously, but it didn't feel small so much as honest. The way a well-tailored coat feels smaller than an oversized one, but fits better in every way that matters. The kitchen had 4 burners and a refrigerator that hummed to itself with quiet industry. The living room had 2 windows that caught the afternoon light and held it. The bedroom was plain and clean and entirely without the accumulated weight of 31 years of living. I stood in the kitchen and ran one hand along the laminate countertop. Not marble, not granite, just clean, solid surface that would hold a mixing bowl, a cutting board, a cup of morning coffee without complaint. Mine. I'll take it, I said. Sandra blinked. You don't want a few days to... I've had all the days I need, I said. I'll take it. I signed the lease that evening, put down the deposit, scheduled my move-in for the 1st of the month, 3 weeks out. Enough time to leave the old house with care rather than haste. I had spent 31 years in those rooms. They deserved a proper departure. 2 days later, as I was sorting through the hall closet, Brittany arrived. I heard the car, then heels on the front porch, too high for the weather, too deliberate to be casual. The knock was practiced, poised. When I opened the door, she was standing in a coat the color of winter sky, her lipstick immaculate, her expression arranged into something that was meant to look like concern, but landed closer to grievance. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stepped past me into the living room the way people do when they still believe the narrative gives them the right to, when they haven't yet understood that the narrative has changed. I closed the door behind her. Slowly, deliberately. She stood in the center of my living room and looked around at the half-filled boxes stacked near the walls, the gaps on the shelves where things had been removed, the general topography of a life in the process of being reorganized. This is getting completely out of hand, she began. Her voice was controlled. She'd prepared this. You've blocked Ethan. You've changed your accounts. Savannah is sneaking around calling you behind our backs. And now apparently you're moving? She spread her hands. What is happening with you? All of that is accurate, I said calmly. Would you like to sit down? She didn't sit. People who are prepared for a confrontation rarely sit. Sitting concedes too much. We are your family, she said, weighting the word the way people do when they want it to function as an argument in itself. I know who you are, I said. Then act like it. You can't just erase us because of one difficult afternoon. I looked at her. At the careful architecture of her. The clothes chosen to signal authority, the posture held slightly too straight, the eyes that were working hard to project calm while something else moved underneath. It wasn't one afternoon, Brittany, I said. It was 11 years of one afternoon, repeated until I stopped expecting anything different. We never treated you badly. You never treated me at all, I said. That was the problem. I wasn't treated badly. I was treated like furniture. Like something functional that occupies a corner until someone needs it and can be safely ignored the rest of the time. Her jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. I brought $47,000 to your marriage and apple crumble to your party, I said, and you couldn't be bothered to take the dish out of my hands. I don't think I'm the one being dramatic. Something flickered across her face. Brief, gone quickly. Ethan is devastated, she said, shifting. Whatever you think of me, he's your son. He loves you. Love is a behavior, I said, not a feeling you announce while laughing at someone through a fence. Her mouth opened, closed. I heard you, I said simply. I was standing right on the other side of that gate, and I heard every word, and then I walked in and spent 4 hours being invisible at a party I wasn't expected to attend. And when I left, the dish I brought was still full. I pisad. That's not a family having a hard week. That's a pattern. And I am done being part of it. She turned slightly, and her eyes found the boxes near the door, the neat stacks of them, labeled and ordered, a whole life being sorted into what stays and what goes. You're really doing it, she said. For the first time, something in her voice shifted. Not softened, shifted. The performance thinning. I'm really doing it. And when you're lonely in that little apartment, she said, when there's no one to call, when you need something and there's no one left. I reached across to the side table and picked up the navy binder Robert Aldrich had given me. I placed it on the coffee table between us with a quiet, deliberate sound. I have myself, I said. And after a lifetime of giving myself away to people who didn't notice, I've discovered that's quite a lot. She looked at the binder, then at me, and then Brittany Hargrove, who had walked into my living room prepared to win something, picked up her purse, walked to my front door, and opened it herself. She paused with her hand on the knob. Don't expect us to come running when you change your mind, she said. I won't change my mind, I said. And I won't be expecting anyone to run. The door closed behind her. I stood in the quiet that followed and breathed it in. Not triumph. Something quieter than triumph and more durable. The particular peace of a woman who has finally said the true thing and found that the world did not end when she said it. That evening, Savannah texted me a single line. She came home fuming. You okay? I typed back. Perfectly fine. Some doors need closing, Savannah. It doesn't mean you're on the other side. 3 dots appeared. Then, still bringing cookies Thursday. Don't bail. I won't, I sent back. And I meant it. On Thursday morning, Helen called. Everything's filed and confirmed, she said. The trust is active. Your accounts are fully protected. The will reflects your current wishes in every particular. As of this morning, Dorothy, you are the sole decision-maker for every inch of your life. Thank you, Helen, I said. 2 words that held the weight of much more than 2 words. I'm proud of you, she said. I smiled into the phone. It's funny. People only seem to say that after you start saying no. She laughed, a real one, brief and warm. After I hung up, I stood in the center of my kitchen in my robe with my coffee going cold and let the morning be what it was. Quiet, entirely mine. Savannah arrived at 3:30 with a tin of chocolate chip cookies and a magazine open to a quiz titled, What Kind of Flower Are You? We sat on the small balcony off the living room, 2 chairs, a side table, the early October air carrying the first real suggestion of autumn, and worked through the quiz in pencil, reading questions aloud and arguing cheerfully about the answers. I was apparently a lilac, quiet, observant, easily underestimated, but impossible to forget once encountered. Savannah was a marigold, resilient, unpretentious, harder to root out than anyone expects. That checks, she said, grinning. When the cookies were gone, we just sat. She swung her feet lightly under the chair. The trees along the street below were beginning to change color at the edges, orange creeping in from the outside like something cautious testing the water. Dad says you turned your back on family, she said eventually. I didn't answer right away. He's hurt, she added, softer. Not that it excuses anything. Then he's finally paying attention to something that matters, I said. She looked down at her lap, quiet for a moment. Then, I miss the old you sometimes. And then I remember that the old you was just disappearing quietly, I said. Yes, that wasn't me. That was survival. I get that now. She nodded. I really do. We sat a while longer. Then she reached into her bag and produced a folded piece of paper, different from the drawing, smaller, slightly crumpled at the edges, like something she'd been carrying for days and taken out and put away again several times before deciding. I wrote something, she said, for the support group proposal. I'm submitting it to the school board next week. She hesitated. I want to use your name in the proposal as, I don't know, an example of someone who figured out that leaving somewhere that doesn't see you isn't abandonment. It's self-preservation. I looked at her. Only if you use it for something true. That's the only way I use it now, she said. The sky behind the rooftops was going peach and rose, the particular extravagance of an October sunset that knows it's one of the last warm ones. Savannah stood to leave. She shouldered her bag and looked at me with the kind of directness that I had once had myself, at her age, before I learned to look sideways at things so as not to startle anyone. I know this doesn't fix everything, she said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. But I want to be around, if you'll have me. I'll have you, I said. Only as you are. No performance, no messenger service, just you. She grinned, wide and unguarded, the grin of a 16-year-old who has been seen and found acceptable exactly as she is. Marigolds don't perform, she said. No, I agreed. They just grow. After she was gone, I sat alone on the balcony as the last of the light left the sky. The drawing was already hanging inside, in the spot I'd chosen for it, beside the south-facing window in the living room, where the morning light caught the pencil lines and made them glow. The woman with the straight back and the 2 chess pieces and the whole board ahead of her. She's not done. She's just starting to play her game. I had unpacked almost everything by now. The kettle, the blue china that had survived 2 moves and 1 near disaster in 1994. Walter's photograph, the 2 of us paint spattered on the porch, both laughing, the afternoon light turning everything gold. Walter's letter, placed in the drawer with my will and my medical directives where the most important things live. And in the last box, the one I'd labeled "Do Not Open Yet," and then opened anyway on the second morning, I had found it. The letter Walter wrote before his surgery, the one he hadn't survived. If something goes wrong, don't fold in. Stay open. Stay warm. Live with your hands unclenched. You have more strength than you know. He had known me, that was the thing. In 31 years of marriage, Walter Hargrove had known exactly who I was, and he had loved that person without requiring her to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. I had forgotten, somewhere in the years since he died, that being known was possible, that I had experienced it and could find it again. I placed his letter in the drawer and closed it softly. The house sold on a Wednesday. Robert called at 10:30. Offer came in above asking. Couple in their 60s, no children, looking for quiet and history. I almost laughed. They had found both. I did not go back for the walkthrough. I signed the closing documents Robert brought to my apartment, and when he called to say it was done, I stood in the middle of my living room, this small, honest space with its 4 burners and its humming refrigerator and Savannah's drawing beside the window, and I felt the house release me. Or perhaps I released it. After 31 years, I'm not sure there's a difference. That afternoon, I drove to the Greenway Women's Shelter on Millbrook Avenue. I had called ahead. The director, a woman named Patricia Owens, met me in the lobby, a practical space, clean and intentionally unwelcoming to anyone who might want to find the people sheltered inside. I handed her the check. She looked at the amount for a long moment. Then she looked at me. This is... She stopped. Her eyes filled. Mrs. Hargrove, this is extraordinarily generous. It's not generosity, I said. It's intention. I stayed here once, a very long time ago, before my son was born. I left without much, and the women here made sure I left with enough. I paused. Use it for the women who leave without shoes. There are always women who leave without shoes. She pressed my hand between both of hers and didn't say anything else. I didn't need her to. This was not grief. This was a circle closing. Pain carried for 50 years finally set down somewhere it could do something useful. I walked back to my car in the thin October sunlight and sat behind the wheel for a moment with my hands in my lap. Well, I thought, we got here. My 73rd birthday came on a Saturday. No alarm, no surprise. Just morning light through clean curtains and the sound of rain somewhere distant and the quiet breath of a life that fit me at last. I made pancakes. 2 of them, with honey and a sliced pear arranged on the plate because I felt like it, because no one was there to tell me it was fussy or unnecessary. I made coffee in the good pot, the one I'd kept packed until last because I wanted it to be the first thing I used when the kitchen was truly mine. I propped Walter's photograph on the chair across from me. Well, I said. We got here, didn't we? At noon, Savannah arrived with red tulips still wrapped in paper from the florist and a card she had made herself, painted, not printed, on heavy watercolor stock. On the front, 2 chairs on a porch, one empty, one with a teacup resting on the arm. Inside, in her careful handwriting, "Thank you for keeping a seat for me." We had tea and talked about her final exams and her plan to volunteer at the shelter over winter break and the support group proposal that the school board had agreed to pilot in January. She asked if she could use my name in the first meeting, not as a cautionary tale, she said, as an example of what it looks like when someone finally decides they're worth taking seriously. Only if it's true, I said. It's the truest thing I know right now, she said. Before she left, she looked at me the way she'd looked at me on the balcony, taking inventory. You look different, she said. I feel different. Like what? I thought about it. Like someone who stopped waiting to be invited, I said, and started setting the table herself. She hugged me, tighter than before, longer than before, and then went down the steps and along the walk, her tulipless hands in her hoodie pockets, her sneakers still only half-laced. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. A letter came that afternoon. No return address, but I knew the handwriting before I'd finished turning the envelope over. Ethan's hand, the same careful printing he'd used since childhood, when his second-grade teacher told him his cursive was illegible, and he'd switched to print and never went back. I opened it slowly. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I'm not sure you want me to, and I think I understand why. I said things I can't take back. I let things happen that I should have stopped. I stood at that grill with my back turned while you found yourself a chair at the end of a table, and I told myself you were fine because it was easier than paying attention. I don't know how to be the man you needed me to be, and I'm scared that by the time I figure it out, it will be too late. But Savannah talks about you every day now. She's different. She stands up straighter. She says things she means. I think that came from you, or came back from you, and I'm grateful even if I haven't earned the right to be. I'm sorry, Mom. I hope one day you'll let me try. Ethan, I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases and placed it in a drawer. Not with my legal documents, not with Walter's letter. A drawer of its own. One that was neither archive nor trash, but simply a place where something could rest without being decided about yet. Not forgiveness, not refusal, just space, which is sometimes the most honest thing you can offer. That evening, Gloria and Suzanne and Faye came over. Gloria with her crossword books. Suzanne in a cardigan with small embroidered daisies along the collar. Faye with a cherry pie and a crossword clue she'd torn from the paper that morning. 12 down, 5 letters, something that holds ships in place, with a note in the margin. Made me think of you. The answer is anchor. We drank tea in my blue china and ate the pie and talked about Suzanne's neighbor who'd taken up bird watching and now sent group texts at 5:30 in the morning about finches, and Gloria's niece who'd gotten engaged to a perfectly nice young man with cartoon fish on his socks, and the library's Thursday poetry group that Faye thought we should all try at least once. At some point the conversation settled the way it does when women of a certain age sit together with warm things in their hands. Not into silence exactly, but into a fuller kind of quiet. The room feeling occupied in the right way. I want you all to know, I said, that this is the best birthday I've had in many years. No one asked why. They just nodded, the way women nod when they understand something without needing it explained, because they have lived long enough to know what it means when a person says this is enough and means it entirely. After they left, I stood in the doorway for a moment and just listened. Not for the sound of people leaving, not for the silence rushing back in to fill the space, just for the sound of a room that had been full of the right people, still warm with it. That night, before I turned out the light, I opened my journal to a fresh page. I had been keeping journals since I was 23 years old. 33 volumes, all told, sitting in a box in my bedroom closet, labeled in my own handwriting. Somewhere in those pages was every version of myself I had ever been. The young wife, the new mother, the widow, the grandmother, the woman who brought dishes to parties and carried them home untouched. All of those women had led me here, to this small, honest apartment with its 4 burners and its humming refrigerator, to this table where the right people had sat and drunk tea and not required anything of me except to be present, to this window where a girl's pencil drawing hung in the morning light and told me, in lines made by someone who loved me, that I was not finished, that I was only beginning to play my game. I picked up my pen. I wrote, "They asked why I was still alive. Now I can answer. To remember my name, to set my own table, to keep the door open just wide enough for those who knock with clean hands." I closed the journal. I turned out the light. Outside, the October rain had started again, soft and unhurried, the kind that doesn't demand anything, just falls because that is what it does. I lay in the dark and listened to it. And for the first time in longer than I could measure, I did not reach for the phone. I did not run through the list of things undone or the names of people who had disappointed me. I did not rehearse conversations that would never happen or grieve versions of my life that had not come to pass. I just lay there, in a room that was mine, in a life that fit me, and listened to the rain. And I thought, this is what it feels like. This is what it has always been supposed to feel like, to be Dorothy Hargrove, to take up the space I was given and fill it with something true.